So, when I was learning about community development, it made me think about the crisis that is going on right now in the Louisiana because of Hurricane Laura. A lot of people lost their homes and schools in their community. People are coming together to help give them the resources that they need to help them move on during this time. Another thing that has been going on recently in our world is COVID-19. They have really been using community development. And states in other countries around the world are keeping people informed on data in their country, or their state is telling them the numbers of who was affected with COVID and also where the most cases are happening. An example for this is that in the Louisiana, our governor, John Bel Edwards, continued to inform citizens on protocol settings, rules, and keeping us safe during this pandemic. Something else that I've learned about is culture competence. It's cultural competence. In America, we have been called the melting pot. We received this name by being a country that welcomed immigrants that were fleeing from their countries for a better life. In social work, it talks about how we should use culture competence in our practice, and I respect that. With that being said, in our country today, we have a president who is the face of our country and cannot even accept immigrants from Mexico who are just trying to give themselves a better life for their family. With that, it leads me to two huge issues that have resurfaced during this pandemic and election. The first is racism. We have brought up an issue that has been hovering in the background for years. It took a single black man to say, "I cannot breathe," to a police officer, and for him to pass away to bring it back in the picture. During this election, President Trump has used racism as a peak for his campaign and has made white America show their true colors. Now, when President Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, he was using discrimination as a peak for the campaign. He would always talk about how immigrants were dangerous and were taking the jobs from American citizens. That was never the case. The immigrants were working jobs that Americans did not want to work. He discriminated them because they were not white Americans, and when he became president, he made sure that he was going to get rid of any immigrants. A major thing that is going on since we have been dealing with this pandemic, or economic justice. One of the biggest issues that we deal with now is jobs and money. When the pandemic started, it seemed as if our economy stopped. Some people were able to get paid while waiting on what decisions were going to be made. A lot of people were terrified about having to deal with bills and rent payments and resources that you need to survive. One thing that ended up being a huge problem was companies were not easing up on payments, and people were getting laid off because they were not able to pay them anymore because they were not making any money. This issue is something that still now is a big struggle for people. With people out of work with pay for so long, they struggle economically. When talking about the issues with economic justice, it leads to the problem of oppression. This country is definitely in oppression. With the pandemic going on, the struggle with money and jobs. When the pandemic started, people had to stop working, and it got bad because now everyday needs that people need had to be limited. One of the big things that people worried about was medical bills. Dealing with all of these issues, a major thing that can possibly happen is people ending up in poverty. In Louisiana, we have the highest percent of poverty. Because of the pandemic, we were already having economic problems in the state dealing with Governor Bobby Jindal. We were on a bad path economically because of the hurricanes that we had in the past year. The trouble started with Hurricane Katrina, and then Gustav hit, and it created the same issues. People ended up losing their jobs, houses, and communities, and it took months to get it all back together. Those storms happened years ago. It is 2020, and they still have not recovered from those two storms. The next hurricane that came through was Hurricane Ike. It flooded a few parishes, but the state made very good progress from the natural disaster. Now the natural disaster that happened in 2016, the flood, destroyed a lot of houses, and a lot of them had to find shelter from anywhere. Now today in Louisiana and in California, there are people who are losing their homes in the forest fires out there, and now they have nowhere to go. With all of these natural disasters, it causes the talk of globalization. A lot of things have been happening during this pandemic. Globalization is a big deal. It's a big deal right now. The things that is going on right now is having a big impact on the economy and the growth in our economy. There are things that have changed in the world today with COVID-19. A big thing that happened is social distancing and wearing masks. It made a big impact on the world. Dealing with mask wearing, people do not want to wear masks, so the government are making people pay a fine if they go into the building without wearing a mask. The social distancing made a drastic change in my personal life. I have sessions with a social worker, and we have all of our sessions online. Another thing that is a struggle in the world is environmental justice. Nowadays, this is something that is not going to happen. This country has an issue with environmental justice. People in this country do not want everyone in the country to have a fair chance. You could tell this because I was in a lecture with a man who works in the government office at the Louisiana Capitol. In the lecture, he talked about money issues and how people will work the same job and yet they are not getting paid the same because of their race. When you looked at the data, white males have the highest pay in the Louisiana and black women have the lowest pay in the Louisiana. So when looking at that, it is clear that we will never have true economic justice. Another thing we will never see happen is social justice. In the past, America has always had problems with social justice. In this day and age, it may seem that things have gotten better, but they have not. A good example to show we have not improved with social justice is universities. You have black students and ethnic groups and ethnic students that are not white, and they do not have the same opportunities as they do. For example, jobs that you can get with a bachelor's degree as a black student, you have trouble with trying to get the job because they could tell you that you did not meet the requirements to have the job, and the white student just happens to meet them. Another example that would be good is that black students have to have a good ACT score to try to get good TOPS or financial aid to help them get into school. White students have all of these opportunities handed to them, and half the time they do not know what they are doing. So to me, I have not actually seen social justice in effect in our country. Even though I already talked about poverty, there is a topic that correlates with it, and it is economic inequality. In our economy today, the big issue with economic inequality is taxes. Everyone knows in America that we have a class system. The class system goes by lower, middle, and upper class. People in upper class are like your multimillionaires, celebrities, and some high-end government officials. Those are your folks that make your big bucks. They do not have to pay taxes. Now, your middle class is the working class. The middle class basically carries the country on their shoulders because they pay all the taxes. Middle class citizens literally pay for everything in this country, but they do not get anything in return. So economic inequality is something they are really trying to change and make the economy fair. Now, talking about economic inequality, it brings up a major issue that is going on as we speak, and that is going on as we speak, and that is power. When talking about power, it is really being abused today in this country. The president we have today takes his power to a different level. For example, President Trump has tested positive for COVID-19. Since he has power, he gets certain privileges because he is president. With the privileges, he received medicine that a lot of people were not able to have. People are now saying he is trying to downplay the virus because of the power and privileges he has. The next thing I want to talk about is gender role socialization. When talking about this, it is something that is talking about how the type of roles people do. When talking about this, it leads to the conversation about sexism. This is something that has always been a big conversation. Sexism has become a huge topic in business, government, and entrepreneur circles. In government, men look over women all the time because they do not believe they are important. As time has moved on with sexism, empowerment has become a major thing for women to show young girls that they can do anything that they put their minds to. Empowerment has completely helped women get through the sexism issue, and that is a great thing. Now, another conversation that they are not really talking about anymore, and that is sustainability in the context of a global community. A big topic when talking about this is global warming. This country is really trying to make the world safer. They are trying to make it to where we can use less electricity and use more solar power. They are starting to make cars that do not use gas so we can stop polluting the air. Now, a big way to help with the sustainability in the context of global community is through resiliency. If we use resiliency, we can get through a lot of things that is bad for our community. One of the last things that I want to talk about is diversity. Diversity is a very troubling thing to discuss because it is something that is really trying to be fixed. People in America are trying to open up to different cultures so they can respect them. Something that correlates with diversity is intersectionality. When looking at intersectionality, it is a good way to let in different cultures that are not normal to American culture. After talking about intersectionality, it is talking about human rights. Human rights are a very big topic right now because of the whole Black Lives Matter movement. People want to have equal human rights, but no one is willing to change that. Last thing to talk about is how you can have social work practice in the microsocial environment. Social work practice in the microsocial environment is something that is needed in the world right now. In some countries, family is a very big thing that can affect an individual. And society can affect an individual as well. Something that is happening these days in our country is we are paying more attention to what is around us. This is something that needs to be done in everyday life from now on.